Okay, folks, we're going to get going here. We have more people registered than we have people showing up right now, but as people join, they can just come right into the webinar here. So thanks for coming, everybody. We've got participants here from all over Canada, BC, Quebec, Ontario, and I think I've seen the first maritime person come on. So we've got good national representation here. So just a few quick housekeeping notes. We will be recording this webinar, so if you want to watch it later, that's an option as well, and we'll share it with people who weren't able to make it today. During the presentation, we'll refer to some online links, and we'll post those links as they come up in the chat window. And if you haven't found the chat window yet, let us know. I guess you can't if you haven't found it. But that's how we'll basically be asking questions through this webinar, so it keeps everybody's audio muted and just makes things a little bit easier. So you should have seen the chat window pop up. We're seeing a lot of people use it, and you should see a little notification there because we've been using it already. So yeah, when you do have questions, please use the chat feature to do that. And there will be 3 breaks or 2 breaks for questions during the webinar, and then 1 at the end. So when if you've got questions, you can ask them then. So I'm going to turn things over to Alex Lyon to get things started here. And yeah, and hope you enjoy the webinar. Thanks for making it.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Hope that everyone can hear me. Sounds like probably can. And I just wanted to clarify also about the chat window. For me, it pops up, in case you can't find it yet, it looks like if you do Alt-H, you'll get the chat window. And also if you go to the panel at the top of your screen and go to More, you'll find the chat window. All right, so my name is Alex Lyon. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Sustainable Food Systems and part of the research team for the BCC trials. And thanks for everyone for joining us today. It's exciting that we've got people tuning in from all across Canada for either an introduction to the BCC trials if you're participating for the first time this year, or to get an update and find out what's new if you've been working with us already. I'm having a bit of a trouble changing slides here. Bear with me for a moment. All right. So what I want to cover today, first just going over why we do variety trials in the first place, especially this type of coordinated trial with multiple farms. And then I'll talk about the BCC trials and what we've done so far. Then we'll stop for questions if you have them. So you can type them into the chat box as I go, and Shauna will kind of collect them. And then we'll answer questions when I stop at that point. So after I talk about the BCC trials, then I'll go on and talk about what's new in 2018 and how we're expanding the trials, what to expect if you're participating this year, and then Chris will take over and talk about the communication and outreach, and then we'll have some more time for questions at the end. So why do we do variety trials? I think it's pretty apparent that we want to compare varieties to each other, but why do we want to do that? So one reason for doing variety trials is to understand how varieties perform in a target environment. And a target environment is a plant breeding term for the environment where the varieties are going to be used. So you might want to see how varieties compare in a particular region, like we're doing here in BC, or in particular environmental conditions like specific soils or climate regimes. You might also want to test out how varieties perform in particular cropping systems, such as organic. Another reason for doing variety trials is to look for varieties that suit particular market needs you might have, such as flavor, appearance, storage quality, things like shape and size that are important for certain wholesale specifications. So you might be comparing them more for those market characteristics. And then a lot of farmers will do variety trials, often with just a few varieties at a time, so that they have something kind of in the back pocket in case one of the varieties that they really rely on becomes unavailable. That's often particularly a concern with hybrid varieties that might go off the market, and you want to have something to replace it with. Finally, variety trials are an important part of the plant breeding process. So we do variety trials before we start plant breeding to look for parent lines that might go into a cross to create a population to start selecting in plant breeding. And then also do variety trials at the end to test out those new lines or varieties, again, in our target environments. So those are general reasons for doing variety trials. And variety trials are done in a lot of different settings. So one setting is to do them as a centralized large trial at a research station. Usually this is at a university. It could be a private research facility if a plant breeding or if a seed company has a research farm. So these are centralized trials. And the motivations that usually scientists or researchers have for doing these kind of centralized trials is often so that they can have more control over the environment, and that allows them to do hypothesis testing, so answering specific questions about the varieties by controlling the rest of the variables. So that helps with fundamental research, answering broad questions that we need to know about plant breeding and about variety performance. Centralized trials often are used to screen lots of varieties when you really want to look at many varieties, the way that we're doing with our leek trial here, where we've got 33 varieties grown at the UBC farm. It also allows you to plant multiple plots of each variety, which gives you more robust information about the variety performance, and to grow those varieties over many years so that when we look at a variety in just 1 year, we're just seeing how it performs in that weather pattern of that year. And we all know how much weather can vary from one season to the next. So having that multi-year data can be really important. The challenges, though, with these kind of centralized trials are that a research station is often not representative of working farms. That can certainly vary between research stations. I like to think that here at the UBC farm, we're doing our best to really show what a working organic farm looks like, but it still isn't going to represent the whole range of working farms that we have in our region. Also, with centralized trials, if they're managed mostly by researchers, there's less of an opportunity for farmer involvement and to really benefit from farmers' expertise in what they know about growing that crop. So another setting for variety trials is on farms. When farmers do variety trials, if it's a farmer doing a variety trial on their one individual farm, they're often looking for traits that they need in their particular system. Another motivation might just be curiosity to see what's new. And then also for beginning on-farm plant breeding, again, looking for those parent lines that you might use to make a new population. On-farm trials are particularly important for organic agriculture, as I hinted at before, because we have a hard time on research stations involving the farmer expertise that's so important in organic systems, and also because there tends to be a lot of variation between organic farms. Everybody is doing things a little bit differently, and so having on-farm trials that reflect that can be really important. The challenge of doing on-farm trials, for one, if it's just a single farm, then we don't have a comparison across other farms. So that's fine if all you want to know is how variety works on that farm. But if we're looking at selecting varieties for a region, we want to have more than one location that we're looking at. Also, on-farm trials tend to have to be smaller because farmers have limited space and limited time to work on them. So we're not able to do as many replications and have as much confidence about how the variety is doing. And also it can be challenging for farmers to grow the same variety over and over for multiple years to get that multi-year data. So farmer and researcher teams that have been working on variety trials have come up with solutions or to try to kind of combine some of the strengths of centralized trials and on-farm trials. And an approach to this is to do participatory variety trials that pair up a research station with a network of farms. So that's what we've done here in the BC seed trials. All the little points on this map are farms that are growing some version of the trials. And then here in the middle, it's a little too small to pick out the exact one, but here along the coast is the UBC farm where we have our centralized trial. So we have a whole network of farms, but we're still working within one region to make our decisions and select our crops and figure out what's important to evaluate. Another approach, or maybe an expansion of that approach, is what some of my colleagues in the US, in a project that I was involved with before this, have done in the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Collaborative, or NOVIC. So this is a multiple region network. And the trials in this project have just been grown where the stars are on the map. So ignoring the dots for a moment, but just looking at the stars, there are 4 different states involved. And in each of those states, there's a centralized research station and a network of farms. So we have a lot more complexity in that project, because coordinated cross sites means that multiple regions are needing to agree on what crops to grow and what data to collect. However, it gives them this expanded power of having that data from a much broader region and having more people involved. So those are some approaches to variety trialing. And now I want to focus on the BC seed trials and what we've done here. So the overarching goal of the BC seed trials is to engage farmers in research relevant to seed systems development here in British Columbia. And so the aspects of that, the objectives that all tie into that, first is to trial varieties that have a good potential for scaling up our local seed systems. And that's what the variety trials are really all about. Second, we've been doing work to help seed growers evaluate the quality of the seed they're growing by comparing it to commercially available varieties and seeing how well they're maintaining their varieties. Another important part of this research is to develop our capacity to continue doing research in the future by developing a network of farms that are interested in doing trials and developing our outreach approach. And then finally, from more of a social and policy side, we're looking at the relevance of community seed systems for our local food systems. In this project, we're using a trial design that's been used elsewhere, and actually around the world, pioneered by a researcher, a professor at Michigan State, called the SIG-SNAP, and it's called the mother-baby trial design. So this pairs a centralized research site, which is called the mother, with on-farm sites, which are usually smaller trials, so they're called babies. And so here in BC, we have our mother site at the UBC farm, where everything is grown, all the varieties are grown in 3 different plots, and everything is randomized and a little bit more controlled. And then we have our on-farm sites, which in our case grow each variety in 1 plot. I think we have a really unique project because we have such a collaborative research team with different organizations involved. So here's me here with Chris and Shauna. I work for the Center for Sustainable Food Systems at UBC Farm. And the role of UBC in this project, particularly myself, is to do the research design, figure out the experimental design, manage the data and work on results, and also to manage the mother site. So Mel Sylvestre, who is the biodiversity coordinator at UBC Farm, is responsible for managing the trials at the UBC Farm. And we also have students involved with the project. So Carla Hick has been really fantastic over the last year as our main student, work-learn student on this project, and you've probably been hearing from her if you've been involved. And then this coming year, we'll have a new student, Ray Kramer, involved. So then if you return to this picture of the 3 of us in this beet seed field, you'll see Chris Thoreau and Shauna McKinnon, who work for Farm Folk City Folk, which is a Vancouver-based nonprofit working on agri-food systems here in BC. And Farm Folk City Folk really, being already involved with farmer networks here, is really taking on a lot of the communication and outreach. And so you hear a lot from Chris Thoreau if you've been part of this project about what's going on, what you need to do on your farms, and events that are happening. And then you'll also see that Chris and Shauna are up here as part of the Bauta team. So the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security supports this work throughout Canada, in particular Abir, who's the executive director and is here with us today. So that gives you a picture of our research team. It's a little complicated, but we all have our roles then. We all work together on it. So now moving into how we make decisions with the BC seed trials. When we started this project, we began with consulting with farmer groups in our region, including the BC Eco Seed Co-op, to try to set priorities for what was needed for our seed systems and scaling up in BC. So in terms of choosing crops, we looked for crops that are important for our direct markets and diversified farms here. Crops that are a good niche for seed production here in BC. So that would be crops where BC has a good climate for growing seed in that crop. In many cases, it tends to be small dry seeded crops and biennial seed crops such as carrots and beets and kale. So we've been focusing on those. We also try to choose crops where there was a need, so where there was opportunity for improvement and where research hadn't been done recently so that we weren't duplicating other efforts. Within those crops, we have a set of varieties we try to include in each crop, always some varieties that are grown here by seed producers in BC. Some varieties that are the result of plant breeding that's regional, so either BC or the Pacific Northwest, and focused on organic production. Depending on what the priority traits are for that crop, we'll maybe include some heirloom varieties or other new varieties on the market. And then within each crop, and this is an important theme in variety trials, we always include a check variety. So a check is sort of like a control in terms of a scientific experiment. It's a variety that we're very familiar with the performance already, usually something that's just a standard for growers in that region. And by growing the check variety at every farm that does the trial, it gives us a way to compare both within sites and between sites. So for instance, with beets, we know Red Ace is a variety we're all familiar with, and it tends to be very reliable. So if at one farm site, Red Ace is not doing well, then that tells us a lot about the site and how the other varieties are doing. And so that allows us to compare how the other varieties did compared to Red Ace, and then how the other varieties did at that site versus at another site. So our approach to trial evaluation varies between the mother site and the daughter or the baby sites. At the central research station, we tend to collect a lot more data and more quantitative data, while at the on-farm sites, we try to keep it more streamlined, although it certainly is still a lot of work for growers, and we're working on that. So in fact, one of the goals or objectives of the on-farm research is really to develop better methods for collecting data on farms and figuring out the right balance of farmer time spent versus how useful that information is, and what's the best use of farmers' time in collecting and recording data. So our approach has evolved through the years, hopefully getting a little bit better. So in 2016, we started out doing ratings, so comparing varieties on a 1 to 9 scale, some yield measurements, so weight and size, and notes. In 2017, last year, we introduced more open-ended questions to try to get farmers just comments and observations about the varieties, which sometimes can be more descriptive, really, than making farmers do all these ratings. And then now in 2018, we're going to try to get even more streamlined and focus even more on the notes. So that gives sort of an overview of our trial evaluation. The specific things that we're gathering or data that we're collecting for each crop is determined through talking to farmers about what's important in that crop, and also looking at a broader view of other trials in that crop and what's considered important for the market. The crops that we've done so far, starting in 2016, we started with spinach, looking at Bloomsdale types for a late fall harvest. That would be like a loose leaf spinach. We looked at lacinato kale, looking at fall and winter hardiness. We also at the UBC farm, I didn't include this in the slide, but the UBC farm, we also did a curly kale trial. We did beets, looking at golden and Chioggia beets as a summer bunching beet. So those were our 2016 crops. We then carried the beets over into 2017. And in order to be flexible and adapt to what farmers needed and wanted to look at, we then dropped 2 crops and added leeks, as looking at overwintering leeks and really keeping them in the field all the way through January and February, and looking at how much marketable yield we had after the winter. Carrots, looking at orange Nantes style carrots that have good storage quality and good flavor. And now, as I'll be talking about later in the presentation, this year we're going to be adding 2 different kinds of sweet peppers. So I think I said I would stop for questions here. So if anyone has questions so far, let us know.
So this is Shauna from Farm Folk City Folk. I'm gonna run the question period. So we're gonna get into the 2018 plans for the trials in the next section. But if people have questions about variety trials in general, what we've done so far, and methods, this would be a great time to ask those questions. You can either raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you could type your question into the question box. Don't be shy. We love questions.
Maybe everyone's questions are about 2018, which is totally fine.
Okay. Well, if there's no questions, that's fine. I am gonna just type in here into the chat box a link to the 2016 reports that have been completed, and we'll also send out these links in a follow-up email after the webinar. But that's a place where people can get a sense of the results that have been compiled so far, and get a sense of what will be coming in 2018 when the project wraps up.
Yeah, and I'll go into more detail in the next section about what's there so far. I really order on you, Shauna. Okay.
If you're sure we don't have any questions, then we'll continue.
Okay, I'll continue. Okay, so moving into 2018. This is the last year of our BC Seed Trials funding. So we are kind of wrapping up the project, but it will go all the way through early 2019 because we have these crops that are focused on season extension. Excuse me. So the new things that we have coming up in 2018 are, by the end of the year, or actually aiming for the fall, to have full variety trial results, at least in some form that allows you to use them for your seed orders, and then really completing them by the early spring when we have that overwintering data. We will also be getting out some other publications on variety trialing and seed systems. Those will be publications in academic journals, but we'll be providing them in a research brief form that will be available on our website and the Center for Sustainable Food Systems website. And then an exciting part, which is really one of our motivations for this webinar, is expanding these variety trials to other regions in Canada. It's also a year when we are joining and partnering in a new project led by the University of Wisconsin, which is a network of North American variety trials, which I'll get into more detail about soon. And then the Bauta initiative has really coordinated doing a survey of national plant breeding priorities focused on organic and ecological farming. And so, as you can see, there's a theme here of building towards being able to do more farmer-engaged plant breeding and really taking advantage of the network that we've started to build in the variety trials. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be expanding the variety trials across Canada this year, and that's really supported by the Bauta team and by the regional coordinators in each of those places. So the trials that the crops that we're going to be expanding are the leeks and the carrots. And the objective here is to support those regions in evaluating the varieties for commercial use, for seed production, and for plant breeding. So similar to the BC seed trials, but really focusing on the needs within your regions. The regions that are participating are BC, the Prairies, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada. So it's exciting to be able to have the opportunity to see how these crops perform and how these varieties perform, and also what people's priorities are in these really different regions. Like I said, we're doing carrots and leeks this year. The future of the variety trials is uncertain, but we hope that by doing this year, we've built some capacity for whatever we're able to do next in terms of plant breeding or continued variety trials. And then a third crop that we're doing, just kind of building on the network that we have and then joining with the relationships that we've built really through this project, is to partner with University of Wisconsin in doing these North American variety trials. And this is a pilot year of the North American variety trials. The objectives of this network in many ways are still being shaped because there's a wide network of people involved. But the idea is to be able to share information about varieties across this network that includes plant breeders, seed companies, and farmers across North America that would then support the development of new varieties for organic agriculture, both in the form of seed companies who are working on this and on-farm participatory plant breeding. The opportunities for Canada in participating in this, and the reason we thought it was a good match with what we're doing with the Canadian variety trials, is that we are able to trial some of the novel germplasm that will be available through this network, possibly not as much in this pilot year, but going forward as this network is built, those opportunities will become hopefully more advantageous. And then also continuing to build connections with public plant breeding programs in the US, as well as in Canada, so that we can build our capacity for more on-farm plant breeding. So the crops or one crop that is available in this pilot year is sweet peppers. And in Canada, all of the regions except for BC are going to be doing bell peppers. And then in BC, we are doing these elongated tapered peppers, which go by a lot of names. One of the classic varieties is Corno di Toro, so they tend to be referred to as Corno, although I've learned that I think just in Ontario, they are called shepherd peppers, or you might call them roasters or fryers. So, and they're preferred for greenhouse production, so that's why we're doing them in BC. So you'll be seeing some peppers out there too this year. So now I'll move into what to expect if you're participating in the trials. Chris Thoreau and Carla have been working really hard to get seeds packed up and sent out to everyone who's participating. So if you haven't received all of your seeds yet, you should be receiving them soon. And you'll be getting seed in the form of a packet for each variety, and actually each packet is enough for one plot. So in some of these trials, and with some of the varieties, you'll be planting 2 plots of a variety, and so then you'd have a different packet for each plot. And just to note that all of the crop instructions you'll be getting in a more detailed form for each crop, and they'll all be posted at this central website where they'll be emailed to you, but then you can also go download new copies from this website. So you'll have your seed packets, and then in most crops, and Chris and Abir can correct me if I say anything that's not right now, but in most crops you'll also be receiving stakes. And you can use those stakes, or please do use those stakes to label the plots as you plant them. In our first year, we are using these thicker wooden stakes, which were actually a little bit hard to maneuver and drive in the field. So we've switched to these plastic stakes, which are also reusable because you can wipe off the lettering. So you'll have stakes, you'll have seeds, you'll have your instructions mailed to you and in the web, or by email and on the website. And then the design that you want to use when you're planting your fields, I've sort of mapped out the ideal way to plant the trial, and of course you will need to adapt this to what you're actually able to do on your farm. But ideally, with any variety trial, you want to have the the varieties that you're trialing planted in the middle of other stuff that's the same. So if you're trialing a bunch of leeks, you want to have a middle row of leeks and then hopefully leeks on either side. And that way you're not going to have an edge effect, meaning, you know, the edges of a field tend to either get more shade or more insect pressure or more sunlight, all sorts of things that can affect your variety of performance. So ideally you want to have your variety trial planted with a buffer of the same crop around it. If that's not possible, if that would be too much of that crop for you to grow, you could try just making sure that what's on either side of the variety trial is a similar height to the variety trial or just the same crop. And if that's not possible, then at the very least, try to plant your variety trial somewhere in the middle of your field rather than at a total field edge where variety trials tend to be more likely to be eaten by animals, more likely to be blown over, just all sorts of mishaps that can happen on the edge of a field. And so then the order to plant your varieties, like I mentioned, you'll have a check variety. And in all of our varieties, we want to plant 2 plots of the check varieties so that we if there's something strange going on in the field where one plot of the check is planted, we still have another plot to compare it to. So one easy way to do this is just to plant the check plots at either end of the row. You could also randomly disperse them through the trial, but try not to plant them both checks next to each other. And then the rest of the varieties you just plant in a random order. You can pull them out of a hat, just grab them randomly, however you want to do that randomization. And plant them out that way. So that is how you set up your trial. The spacing and the number of plants per variety will all be specified in the crop instructions because those are dependent on what crop you're working with. I've gone into our objectives for the crops a bit already, but just to go into a little bit more detail for this year. With the carrots, again, we're looking at orange carrots that are open pollinated. There are a few hybrids in there as check, but we're really interested in identifying good open pollinated lines. We're looking for a classic nonce shape, which is, to me, it's like a hot dog shape. So it's rounded at the tip with a thin root, and that's particularly good for storage because then you don't have that narrow root end that tends to dry out or rot. So the qualities that we've identified as really important in these carrots are flavor, eating quality, and then storage holding capacity. So while we don't do a lot of the storage evaluation at the on-farm sites, you're welcome to if you want to, but it's not a requirement. At the UBC farm, we store them through the winter and we taste them and evaluate them several times to see how they're holding up. With leeks, the objectives are to identify an open pollinated leek that is very winter hardy, has upright tops, which tends to make harvesting and weeding a bit easier, and has, this is part of winter hardiness, but has a good marketable yield even after going through the cold and the wet weather. And then in peppers, and I have to say, for people who are participating in the pepper trials, this is a pilot year, and so a lot of the information, and it involves, again, a larger network than we have with the BCC trials. So a lot of the information has been a little later than we'd like in coming to us about what the priorities are that the plant breeders and the seed companies would like to see. But in general, I think it's safe to say with the peppers, we're looking at both open pollinated and hybrid lines, and looking at appearance and flavor and yield. And it'll be a pretty simple evaluation for the on-farm sites, but we'll have more information coming along. So again, when it comes to evaluating your trial, the forms are going to be posted on the central website and also emailed to you. They're not all finished right now, so we will be updating them soon and getting you final versions. Depending on the crop, there will always be an evaluation at harvest, and then with some crops, there's an early evaluation, so usually looking at seedling vigor. And we're not going to have farmers do counts of germination rates for things like carrots, where it's really time consuming, but really just looking at the variety and seeing, looking at the plot overall, how vigorous do the seedlings look, how big are they compared to the other plots. So those are things to expect for evaluation. Would usually be something early in the season and then at harvest. I already mentioned where the instructions are, that those will be updated. For the way that you do the evaluations can vary depending on whether you're participating in this as part of the BC seed trials or whether you're in a different region. But the way we do them here varies. There can be some, usually the early season evaluations are independent, done by the farmer on their own. With the harvest evaluations, we do try to make some visits during the season, and if we can be there to help with the harvest evaluation, we do, depending on our capacity, again, for traveling and getting there in time. And we also do group evaluations. So when the trial is ready to be evaluated on one farm, inviting over other farmers in the area, opening up to gardeners and the public to come to one farm and do sort of a mini field day and look at the varieties together and comment on them. So that's how the evaluation works. With accessing results, with our, like Shauna mentioned, that our results are available on our website. Right now what we have available is the preliminary reports from 2016. So we have a report on spinach, kale, and beets. I haven't been able to get reports out for 2017 because I was on maternity leave last year. So those are a little bit later in coming. But this year, as soon as possible, we'll be trying to share just a little bit of snippets of information about overall impressions of the best varieties from 2017. And then by the fall, we'll have preliminary reports for our leeks and carrots. And then having a finalized report by the spring. And an updated report for beets would also be coming this year because we have a second year of data on that. Another thing that we'll have available hopefully by fall, which I'm excited about, is a database of the really nice photos that Chris has been taking of our crops. So with each variety at the UBC farm, we have a nice standardized photo of what that variety looks like, and that will be available through a link from our project website to be able to search for those varieties and see variety photos for each one. And then wrapping up in the spring of 2019, we'll have the final reports for all crops, which compare the data across all the years. And we'll have preliminary reports for the peppers as part of the North American Variety Trial Project. So I'm guessing people probably have more questions now. But I'm going to turn this over to Chris to talk about the communication and outreach for the project, and we can answer more questions at the end. Thanks.
Let's take a break here just for questions on 2018 trials before Chris gets started on the final section. So again, people could either type their questions in or you could raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can just ask your question directly. And at least one person has to ask the question so that we can test how the questions work.
I'm sure I left some information out, so.
Okay. Okay, well, if there aren't any questions, oh, Serena has a question. Thank you, Serena. Okay, I'm gonna unmute you and you can ask your question.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So coming from an area very different than the lower mainland in BC, there is like particular interest in northern BC to start not just being like farm participants, but actually getting some support and saving our own seed from the varieties we like. Is there any opportunity with this program to get support in overwintering and starting to save seed for those who haven't done it before?
That's a really great question. I don't know, Chris, do you want to, or Shauna, would you want to speak about seed saving workshops we've done?
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you asked that question because we definitely have been receiving or noticing that there's a lot of interest from northern growers in not only seed saving, but also plant breeding for northern climates. And we know there's a real need there. And we see that in BC, but also in the prairies. So from the perspective of Farm Folk City Folk and the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian seed security, we definitely want to find a way to better support northern growers. So, you know, while we were starting the BCC trials, we were really focusing on the Lower Mainland because that's kind of, and Vancouver Island, because that's where we already had a network of growers and where we could more easily start. But I think that the next phase of expansion is definitely giving more support to northern growers, and we would like to be able to support you in doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, as we figure out next steps, as the BCC trials wraps up and we figure out next steps, just as a group of people interested in doing this kind of work, that feedback is really helpful to have. So thank you.
Are there any other questions?
There was just one in the chat from Delisa here. Oh wait, there's several in the chat.
Oh yes, there are several. Perfect. Okay, so we'll start from the top. So from Stephanie, who is the regional coordinator in Atlantic Canada. She's asking if you could speak to the flexibility available to growers who want to tailor their trial by using regional varieties or other varieties that aren't in the BC seed package.
Yes, this is really what I was hoping with expanding the trials to other parts of Canada, would be that other regions would want to add on varieties that you know, are from their region. That's really the point of this. In terms of how you as a regional coordinator might go about supporting farmers to do that, I don't know, Abir, would you want to speak to that?
Sure. I don't know if Steph's question was with respect to how RCs can support it, but perhaps more just in terms of how farmers can integrate it into their system, into their trial. And if that's the case, I think we were discussing that, you know, farmers would be able to add a variety to their trial, and it can just even be a single replication to observe like a farm-safe seed variety or a variety from a local seed producer. And if they wanted to add that into their trial, they'd be able to do it, but not necessarily have to do 2 replications of it, but just an observational planting, so they can at least see how it performs against some of the other varieties that they're using, whether it's leeks, carrots, or peppers.
Yeah. Yeah, and if there are, I guess one step further with that would be if there is a variety that is locally grown that more than one farmer in a region wants to grow, that would be great to have 2 farms doing it. But this is a little bit dependent on how much support regional coordinators might be able to provide for that. But I think that's something we can continue to take up as like the research team of the, without overstepping here, that maybe the research team of the Bauta initiative could discuss would be, you know, if there are multiple farmers in a region that want to grow the same additional variety, just, you know, that they should do that, and then they would just be in communication about that, that they're aware that there are more than one farm trialing that variety, so they can compare notes afterwards.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks. Okay, and we also have a question from Rebecca Ivanov, who's in Ontario. When you were talking about appearance of the peppers, I'm curious how you will quantify this. Also, one thing I'd love support with is documenting taste. How have you evaluated that in your past trials?
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a great question about what do you exactly mean by appearance. And I was trying to keep the objectives for the peppers kind of broad, because I'm actually waiting for clarification. I think we all are, about some of the objectives for that trial. But from what I've seen from the evaluation sheets that farmers would use, it's really about you making notes on the peppers based on what is important to you. So, you know, if a bell pepper, if it's color that's really important to you, how red is it, or how shiny is it, or is it a uniform shape, or maybe you don't want uniformity, but is it a shape that you like? So all of those kind of things that would, like in my mind, appearance as it for direct market growers or for CSA growers is really about like what makes that variety pop as something that you would want to grow. Okay, and then the other part of that question is documenting taste. Absolutely. We can, so the way that we have done taste in the BC seed trials has been for farmers to do it kind of informally. So we don't provide them with, it's not required. We don't provide them with specific instruction. We just say, if you want to do a taste test on this, by all means, please do. And please share notes with us if you have them. At the UBC farm, what we've done is have two different approaches. One is to have a day at the market where we have a chef come and make a big event out of it, and lots of people sample all the varieties. And the other is to do it just with a smaller team of whoever's available at the UBC farm that day, and to prep all the varieties in the same way, and then have a worksheet that they use for tasting them. So if people are interested in doing their own variety trials, we can definitely share our tasting sheets with you. And that would be lovely for farmers to do their own tastings.
Great. And I think Chris is going to talk a little bit more about tastings as well.
Yeah.
And finally, there's a question from Delisa, and she's wondering if there's opportunity to purchase some of the better seeds or cultivars that have been in the trials, specifically those such as beets that were not commercially available, but saved by and in the trials. The sources for each variety are in the crop instruction sheet. So in that crop instructions website link that we posted earlier, and we'll make sure everybody knows what that is. So in the general information about each crop, there's a table that lists all the varieties and what seed source they came from. So you can see there all the varieties that were from BC seed companies. And then just as we share results and notes, we will be referencing the seed sources. So then you could just go to that source yourself. And I understand that some of our results haven't come out in time for that season's decisions. But certainly in the future, and especially now that we have multiple years of data, you would be able to notice which BC grown varieties really stood out. I hope that answers the question. Yeah, and I think I recall, Delisa, that there was one variety that performed really well on your farm that actually wasn't commercially available. I think it's the only one that has been in the trial so far, or 2016 and 2017 that wasn't, but we could definitely connect you with that source. And that might be something that also comes up with the pepper trials, because there will be material in those trials that isn't commercially available.
And that actually reminds me, thank you very much for reminding me about something I didn't mention with the trials, which is that we send these seeds to you without the variety name on it, but just a code, so that the variety trial is, as much as possible, a blind trial, and we're not biased when especially since we're doing such qualitative evaluations where it's not just measuring something, it's really making notes about it, that we're not biased by knowing what the variety is. So we send them to you without the identifying information on them. That said, if there's a variety that you're really curious about because you want to buy it, like by all means, let us know and we will let you know what that variety is. There's a limit to how far we're going to go with this blind trial thing. As long as you're not carrying the variety names with you to the field, we will send you the sort of like cheat sheet for the code so that you can make those purchasing decisions if you want to earlier on. And we will also be posting at the end of like when we put out the final reports, we would include what the variety codes are and what the identity of that variety is so that you can make sense of what you've seen in the field.
Great. Are there any more questions before we move on to the last section? Okay, thanks so much. And I'll hand it over to Chris.
Okay, thanks for all that, and thanks for the great questions, everybody. So yeah, I'm going to cover three things here. I'm going to look at farmer communications, just how we communicate with you in different ways, social media and photo documentation. As you can tell already, we like to take photos, and then just looking at how to incorporate evaluation, field days, and tastings into your trials wherever that's possible. Try to change the slide here.
Just get Alex and change it.
There we go. Okay. Okay, so I guess as a general point of information, we're going to be in touch with you in order to basically share and request information over the course of the season. But more than that, we do want you to feel as if you're a part of something bigger going on. So these communications also just keep you connected to what's going on overall. And one of our goals is to keep you engaged, but not overwhelmed. We know there's a lot on your plate during the season, so we'll try to make sure that the emails we send are very relevant to the trials, and we won't send you random information about, this cool article on seed. This will be very specific stuff that is about the trials. So your main point of contact is going to be the regional coordinator in your area. So in BC, it's going to be myself and Alex Lyon. But elsewhere, it's going to be basically the person who recruited you for the trials. So Abir Day will be your contact in Ontario, Hugo Martorell in Quebec, Stephanie Hughes in the Maritimes, and then Iris Weissman in the Prairies, even though we have not yet confirmed a prairie grower for the trials yet. So we use a multitude of ways to actually keep in touch with growers. In BC, we connect with farmers both individually through email and then through a group listserv, which allows us to send emails to the whole group of farmers at one time. This year, we're likely to use some more sort of customized emails. So probably sending more individual emails and then emails in groups, such as leek growers in Quebec or carrot growers in BC. That way you're getting more information on stuff that's relevant to the crops that you're growing, and that everything's relevant. Over the course of the year, there's a lot of information we could be sharing, so we just want to make sure that the emails we send to you are relevant to what you're working on. So the kind of stuff that we're going to be in touch about, so one would be doing evaluation reminders. So once we know your planting date for crops, we'll have a good sense of when you'll be ready to do your germination and vigor testing, any mid-season disease evaluations, and then the end-of-season harvest evaluations. So what we try to do is just give you a little prompt around the time we think it's going to be for you to do your evaluations, and that's just a little bit of a reminder to help you along. We'll also be looking at getting in touch for data collection. So once you've done reminders, your evaluations, getting that data to us as soon as possible is valuable. If it's too much for you to email the data or to take a picture and send it, it's totally fine. You can send it to us at the end of the season or send it to your regional coordinator at the end of the season. But one of the reasons we like to get the data from you as quick as possible is that you don't have to think about it after that. And that way you don't have to worry about losing it, which has happened on a few farms. So it just takes a little bit of pressure off that way. And then another thing would be if there's any events such as workshops, field days, or tastings that are coming up that might be relevant to you as well. So just general ways to keep you engaged overall throughout the season. There might be a few general check-ins as well if questions come up that we need to confirm anything. This will be especially if there's long gaps between evaluation periods, and somewhat just as a reminder to you that we're still here and we're still thinking about you. But as I said before, we do try to limit our communications to really the most essential things on the trials. Okay, so we do a lot of social media with this project. Our main mechanisms are basically Facebook and Instagram. And that's a way for us to share images and stories about what we're doing with this project. And it's a way of sharing the research and farmer engagement with a much wider audience. It's easier for research to sometimes just be held amongst a research team. And because we're trying to engage people overall in the importance of seed, I think that the more we can share, the more likely it is to engage people along the way. So yeah, we're very, very active on social media. And so if you're using these means as well, Facebook and Instagram being the primary ones, we do encourage you to follow us on those pages. And also if you tag us, that way we know your Facebook handle as well. And we can tag you in our posts, which allows us to highlight your farm's involvement in what we're doing as well. We do have most of that. We do have most of the social media platform information for BC growers. So for the growers in the rest of Canada who have joined the trials this year, if you can share your information with us, that'll be great and make it much easier for us to connect with you. We also have a Flickr album, so we do a lot of pictures of our field days and our evaluations, and then lots of photos of the crops themselves. So we've actually got an individual folder with all the crops from last year, so you can get a good look at what those crops look like, both at UBC Farm and on other farms as well. So if you've got photos to share, we really like that because it allows us to show maybe some varietal differences that are showing up in different environments as well. Okay. So beyond just the research part of the trials, one of the goals around the trials is to use them as a mechanism to engage other farmers, and in particular by getting them out to different farms to look at these crops. So there's two ways that we generally do this. So one is evaluation field days, and the other is tastings, and the two can actually happen simultaneously. So when it comes to time to do your harvest evaluation, this is something you can do on your own. As Alex mentioned, we'll often try to make it out to the farm as well so we can go through that with the farmer. But it's a great chance to invite other farmers that you're close to, other people that are interested in the trials. So more than just getting an evaluation of the trials, you're actually getting a chance to have conversations about the different varieties. And what's nice about this is everybody notices different things about the crops, and it allows you to have conversations that wouldn't happen if you were doing the evaluation on your own. So it just allows a little bit more of a dynamic look at the crops. Beyond that, one of the big pieces of feedback we've gotten from all our field day events over the years is one of the number one reasons that farmers come to these events is actually just for the networking. And so just getting the chance to get out to other farms when you can is a good chance to just stay a bit connected, especially during the season when we can get pretty busy on our own sites. So we do really encourage farmers to visit other sites and really hope that the regional coordinators can get out there and help coordinate that as well. You can do this in an official capacity, in a publicly promoted field day, or you could do it sort of unofficially by just inviting a few neighbors or a few friends. So there's lots of different ways to do that. We've got some write-ups on just some basic stuff to think about with a field day that might be helpful in helping you organize that. So tastings are very similar. In a lot of our field days last year, we just did a very, very simple tasting so we could actually get a sense of what the varieties did taste like. It kind of addresses the idea of that something could perform very well in the field, but if it doesn't have the flavor people are looking for, the question is whether or not that's going to be the best crop to be growing. So it does, as Rebecca asked earlier, it gives us a chance to get a sense of what the flavor is. And in feedback we've gotten from growers over the years, breeding crops and choosing crops for flavor is a very, very important aspect. And just like the evaluation field days, like the tastings are very fun and they're very social, and it just gives a little bit of a lighter sort of touch to things that can be often very, very data heavy. And what we've done a combination of both sort of qualitative and quantitative data collection for tastings. As Alex mentioned earlier in the tastings at UBC Farm, people will do some tastings and give things a numerical rating. And in some of the more casual public tastings we've done, we actually just lay a big sheet of craft paper out on the table, and then underneath each variety you can just write some comments there with a marker. So it's just kind of a fun way to engage with the crops while still getting a bit of input on how they taste. Another option, which you may have in different regions depending on your resources, is actually to do sugar testing of your crops as well. So we invested in a refractometer this year, which is a device that helps us measure sugar content in crops. And that's, even though it's just a measure of the sugar content, that often will correlate with the sweetness and people's preference for a crop. So it's just another sort of piece of information that can help us gather information about the crops. Switch slides there. So, sorry. So this year, with our expansion to the rest of Canada with these BC and national seed trials, in the last year we had about 25 farms that we were working with here in BC, and now with the national trials we've got about 60 farms. I think it's about 63 altogether. So it's really exciting to be able to share data and engage with such a wide variety of farmers. A couple of weeks ago, I got to do a sort of check-in phone call with growers that were doing leeks in Quebec. I've been able to have email communications with many of you with simple questions over the past few weeks. And, you know, this is a real interesting opportunity to see how varieties like these carrots perform in such a wide range of environments. Coastal BC is a fairly unique climate within Canada. So for us to be stretching into central and northern BC and then into, you know, southern Quebec and the Maritimes really is going to give us a really broad look at what's, you know, how these crops perform over a wider area. So that's it for the presentation part. We've got a list of folks we just want to acknowledge here. Even though we do have a core team here at the BC Seed Trials Project, there's so many people that are involved at so many different levels that make this project successful. And I think over this year with these national trials, we're going to see more and more collaborations. And so we really couldn't be as successful and widespread without everybody's input. So we really appreciate everybody's help to this point. And I will end stuff there. So if people have more questions about how communications will look, any questions about field days and tastings, and then anything as well that you heard earlier with Alex, or any question that we didn't cover, this would be a great time to do that.
So again, I would welcome you to raise your hand or just type into the question box, to the chat box. Yes, so can we send along the presentation slides? Absolutely. We will, the webinar was recorded, so we will be circulating the recording. You can also circulate the presentation slides, and we most likely will add them to the Seed Trials website, so they'll be accessible there. And then also in a follow-up email from all the webinar participants will receive all the links that were mentioned today. So places to find the trial reports, the crop instructions, social media information, all of that will be sent to you as well. Great. Well, if anyone has a final question, oh, great. How do we access the evaluation sheets? Yes, so the evaluation sheets are going to be on that website link for the crop instructions. So you can go to that page now and you'll see where they will be posted. But as Alex mentioned, the ones for this year are still under development. So they'll be posted there in ample time for you to do your evaluations. But everything will be on that central website this year. It also will be emailed to you directly. But if you, when in doubt, you can always look back at that webpage and find the information you need.
Yeah, they'll be up soon. I just want to make sure that we incorporate some of the feedback last year about what was difficult or better for farmers to do. And also to that end, if you still have feedback about how the evaluation went for you last year, I'm still happy to hear it.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone that participated today, and also just to recognize that this project would not be possible without farmers doing the trials and without your interest and dedication to making these happen on your farms. So thank you very much for your time and knowledge. And also I wanted to say thank you to our funders as well. And you can see them there on the screen. So the Better Family Initiative, UBC Farm, Center for Sustainable Food Systems, and especially the Investment Agriculture Foundation of BC, who have been the primary supporter for this project.